She hired a private investigator to catch her cheating husband, never suspecting that the woman she hired was his mistress. Now caught in a web of lies, two women with every reason to hate each other must confront the man who deceived them both, and decide whether betrayal will break them or set them free. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The soft click of designer heels echoed down the marble hallway as Susie Pierce returned home from her midday charity luncheon. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of her suburban estate, casting perfect rectangles across the glossy floor, as if even the light knew how to behave in her world. From the outside, everything was immaculate. A beautifully kept home, perfectly aged Chardonnay chilling in the fridge, a golden retriever named Max snoozing by the French doors. Her husband, Richard Pierce, was a partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. Their names appeared in Lifestyle and Living more than once, a power couple of purpose. But beneath the curated perfection, Susie felt it, the slow, sickening unraveling. She dropped her handbag on the entryway table and took off her coat in one smooth motion. But her hand lingered for a beat too long. Her eyes flicked to the grandfather clock in the foyer. Richard said he'd be at a deposition all morning. Then in court this afternoon. Then dinner with a client. It had become his routine language of evasion. She padded softly into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Her reflection caught in the chrome faucet. Elegant, sharp-featured, every strand of her honey-blonde hair still obediently pinned. But her eyes gave her away. Something in them was tight, alert, waiting. Her phone buzzed on the granite counter. A message from Monica, her best friend since college. "You okay? You seem distracted at lunch. Want to talk later?" Susie stared at the screen for a moment. Her thumb hovered. Then she locked the phone. She wasn't okay. Not really. She'd found the lipstick. That was a month ago. Not hers, not a brand she wore. A wine-red smear on the inside of Richard's gym bag. At first, she told herself it must have been old. Or a friend's. Or nothing. But the feeling had grown like a bruise beneath the skin. Missed calls. The sudden change in cologne. How he didn't touch her anymore. At least not the way he used to. And when she brought it up, he smiled. That easy, lawyerly smile that never quite touched his eyes. "You're imagining things, babe. You work too hard to be stressed out like this." She had stared back at him, wondering when babe had started to sound like stranger. Back in her home office, Susie sat at her desk and opened her laptop. Her search history had become its own confession. Signs of infidelity. How to catch a cheating husband. Discreet private investigators near me. She hesitated, then clicked the bookmarked link. Veronica Steele Investigations. Discretion. Results. No drama. The website was simple. Professional. A clean black and white design. The face of the woman on the homepage, mid-30s, sharp jawline, dark hair, eyes that could peel back lies, made Susie pause. She dialed the number. It rang once. "Veronica Steele," came the voice, crisp, calm, and unmistakably in control. Susie closed her eyes. "Hi. I need your help." And just like that, the first card fell. The cafe was one of those quiet, expensive places tucked behind a row of boutiques, where the flat whites came with foam art and no one raised their voice above a murmur. Susie chose it because it felt safe, anonymous, upscale. She sat at a corner table beneath a wide skylight, dressed in neutral tones, her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup of chamomile tea she wasn't drinking. At exactly 2:00, the door opened, and Veronica Steele walked in. She moved like she owned the floor, dark-tailored coat, sleek bob that curved perfectly under her jaw, black boots that made no sound as she walked. There was nothing soft about her. Even the way she scanned the room suggested she wasn't looking for company. She was assessing threats. Susie raised her hand slightly, and Veronica zeroed in. "Mrs. Pierce?" she asked, reaching out for a brief but firm handshake. "Please call me Susie." Veronica took the seat across from her and slid a leather-bound notebook from her coat pocket. She didn't open it yet, just placed it on the table like a badge of credibility. Her eyes, steely gray, were the kind that didn't blink much. You mentioned on the phone you suspect your husband is cheating, she said without hesitation. Susie flinched just slightly. Hearing it aloud made it feel heavier, as if it were now part of the air between them. Yes, Susie said, forcing calm into her voice. I don't have solid proof. Just changes. Distance. Lies that don't make sense. Veronica gave a slight nod. That's how it usually starts. She opened her notebook. The page was blank, but Susie had no doubt she'd leave with a full psychological profile. His name? Richard Pierce. He's a partner at Prescott and Lang, Veronica finished. I know the firm. Susie blinked. You do? Veronica gave a faint smile. You'd be surprised how many marriages end in that building. She started taking notes. Calmly. Efficiently. Questions flowed like water. What time did he leave the house? What excuses had he given? Did he use cash, or did everything go through cards? Did he sleep differently? Shower more often? Susie felt herself shrinking and stretching at once, exposed and oddly relieved. Finally, someone was doing something. I don't want a scene, she said at one point. I don't want to ruin his career. I just want to know the truth. Veronica looked up from her notes. I don't do scenes, Susie. I do facts. Evidence. Once you have that, what you do with it is your decision. Susie nodded slowly. Okay. They talked for another 20 minutes. By the time the check came, Veronica had a small file tucked in her bag. Copies of Richard's schedule, car license plate, social handles. Susie handed her a retainer check, fingers trembling only slightly. As Veronica stood to leave, she gave Susie a cool, professional smile. I'll be in touch. And remember, people always lie better when they think no one's watching. Then she walked away, calm and confident, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Susie remained seated, staring into her cold tea, not realizing she'd just handed her life to the one person who already knew her husband's secrets, because she had been one. The first report came 4 days later. It arrived in a plain, unmarked envelope slipped through the mail slot, just as Veronica had promised. No logos, no return address, just Susie's name written in neat, slanted handwriting. Inside, a manila folder, a flash drive, and a single note. Susie, your instincts were right. V. Susie sat at her desk, her breath catching. The house was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock in the hall. She glanced at the front door, locked and bolted. Still, she drew the curtains before inserting the flash drive into her laptop. Images flickered across the screen. Richard stepping out of his car in front of a hotel downtown. Richard speaking too closely to a woman outside a restaurant, his hand briefly brushing her back. A grainy photo taken through glass. His face relaxed, laughing in a way Susie hadn't seen in months. But the woman's face was always just turned enough, blurred just enough, to hide her identity. Veronica was clever like that. Too clever. 2 hours earlier, Veronica had been in the same hotel lobby she'd photographed, but from the inside. She sat across from Richard at a dimly lit corner table. Her legs were crossed, her fingers playing idly with a cocktail straw as she watched him scroll through his phone. You didn't tell me you were going to the wine bar with your wife last week, she said coolly. Richard didn't look up. Wasn't planned. You don't plan anything with her anymore, Veronica said, voice low, sultry. That was our thing. Richard smiled faintly and leaned back. Don't be jealous, Ronnie. Veronica's jaw twitched, just for a moment. He was still calling her that. Ronnie, the nickname he'd given her when the affair was new and electric. Now it felt like a leash. I'm not jealous, she lied. But if I'm going to keep being your dirty little secret, I'd like to know when you're faking domestic bliss in public. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. You're starting to sound like her. She forced a smile. Maybe I'm just finally seeing how you operate. Richard leaned in, lowering his voice. Don't start. You knew what this was. Veronica nodded and reached for her coat. She had already printed the photos. She had already sent the folder. He didn't know. Not yet. Back in her car, Veronica sat with her hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. The lies were layered now, compounding. She told herself she was helping Susie, that she was just giving her what she wanted. But deep down, she knew this was about control. About undoing Richard's power over her without admitting how much she'd let him have it in the first place. At home, Susie stared at the last photo on the flash drive. Richard standing just outside a hotel suite door, his hand on the small of a woman's back as they entered. The timestamp, 11:47 p.m. 2 nights ago. She closed the file. Tears didn't come. Not yet. Instead, she sat very still, heart hollowed out, and thought, I don't know who she is. But I will. The next meeting between Susie and Veronica took place in Susie's sunlit kitchen. A strange setting for something so shadowed by betrayal. Susie had offered coffee, and Veronica had accepted with a small nod, standing by the marble island like a guest who wasn't sure if she belonged. Her sharp black jacket was still buttoned, her eyes scanning everything. The tidy counters, the spice rack alphabetized, the subtle elegance of the home. Everything had its place. Everything except the truth. So, Susie asked, voice measured but clipped. You said you had more. Veronica opened her satchel and pulled out a few sheets of paper, credit card statements, gas station charges, a receipt from a jewelry boutique. He bought something last Friday, she said, laying down the receipt. A necklace. Not for you, I'm guessing. Susie didn't react. Not visibly. But something behind her eyes flickered, like a light short-circuiting in a distant room. He gave me a blender for our anniversary, she murmured, almost to herself. Veronica didn't smile, didn't speak. This part was always the same, watching the wives do mental arithmetic with their memories, rewriting years, unfolding moments they'd once smoothed over. I appreciate your thoroughness, Susie said, her tone sharpening again. But I still haven't seen her face. Veronica sipped her coffee. Not yet. There was a long pause, heavy but strangely not uncomfortable. Susie studied her. You seem familiar with this. Veronica tilted her head, pretending not to understand. With cheating? No. With him. Susie's voice was soft, but her eyes were suddenly sharper than they'd ever been. Veronica blinked. There it was, the first real crack. I'm familiar with men like him, she said carefully. They build entire lives on charm and omission. You don't notice the rot until it's under your skin. Susie nodded slowly. That's poetic. You always speak that way. Veronica didn't answer. She stood to leave. I'll be in touch, she said, tucking her papers away. Wait. Susie's voice stopped her. Veronica turned, eyes narrowing just slightly. You said you don't do drama, Susie continued. But this is already dramatic, isn't it? Tracking my husband. Photographing his affair. Watching me drink coffee in the house he bought with the same lies he told you. The room fell to a hush. Veronica didn't move. Didn't blink. You think I don't know? Susie whispered. I don't have the proof yet. But I see it. The way you walk through my house like you already know the corners. The way you avoid certain details but not others. You're in this. Veronica swallowed. She hadn't expected Susie to figure it out. Not yet. Not like this. But she said nothing. Susie leaned back, her voice suddenly cold. Keep digging, Veronica. Let's see how far you're willing to go to protect her. And with that, she turned away, lifting her mug, composed as ever. But now Veronica knew. The hunter had started hunting her back. Rain had been falling since sunset, thin and constant, like a whisper you couldn't quite shake. It slicked the streets in silver and curled along the edges of car windows like fingers trying to hold on. Veronica Steele sat in the driver's seat of her parked car, engine idling, her hands clenched around the steering wheel. Outside the window was Richard's apartment, the one he kept downtown for work. Though it had become their secret place, their quiet little world of half-truths and urgent nights. She hadn't seen him in 5 days. Not since the last argument. He'd called her paranoid, overinvested, told her to remember her place. Now, tonight, she'd called him. Said she wanted to talk. One last time. The door buzzed open when she pressed the intercom. Richard answered in joggers and a loose t-shirt, barefoot, wine glass already in hand. He looked at her like someone greeting a messy habit they weren't ready to quit. Didn't think I'd see you again, he said, stepping aside. I wasn't sure you would, Veronica replied. The apartment smelled like pine wood and soft cologne. Comfortable, expensive, deceptive. She didn't sit. You were right, Richard said after a moment, moving toward the kitchen. About Susie getting suspicious. She's asking questions now. Cold, calculated. It's starting to show. Veronica watched him pour a second glass without asking if she wanted one. Her voice was quiet, measured. She hired me. He paused. The bottle stopped mid-pour. What? She hired me. To investigate you. He set the glass down with a soft clink. Since when? 2 weeks ago. Silence fell like dust. You're kidding. He laughed, but it didn't sound real. You took the job? I didn't know, she lied. He turned toward her. You didn't know she was my wife? She held his gaze. Not at first. And when you found out? I kept going. Richard stared at her, something tightening behind his eyes. Why would you do that? Veronica looked away, lips trembling against truth. Because I wanted to see what I was. To you. To her. To myself. A beat passed. Then his tone changed. Darker. Cutting. You had one job, Veronica. Stay out of sight. Stay convenient. And what was I supposed to be in return? She asked. Your secret? Your break from reality? A placeholder between your lies. Richard stepped closer. Don't get self-righteous. You were never innocent in this. No, she whispered. But I was in love. It was the first time she'd said it aloud. Richard's face softened just slightly, then hardened again. You were a distraction. A damn good one. But that's all this was. Veronica's chest rose and fell, slow and sharp like she was learning to breathe through glass. She nodded. Once, as if accepting a verdict. Then she pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket and placed it on the counter. What's that? He asked. The last copy, she said. The surveillance files. Photos. Locations. Conversations. Proof. He picked it up, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Proof for who? She looked him dead in the face. For your wife. She left without another word. Outside, the rain had become a downpour. Veronica didn't bother with an umbrella. She let it soak through her coat, her hair, her skin, like it could rinse him from her completely. Back in her car, she pulled out her phone and opened a draft message. To Susie Pierce. We need to talk. Tomorrow. In person. I need to tell you the whole truth. She hit send. And then she sat there, shaking, freeing herself, one piece of wreckage at a time. The morning was unreasonably calm. A pale sky hung over the city like held breath, and the wind barely stirred the trees lining the quiet street where Susie Pierce lived. Birds chirped like it was just another peaceful day. But inside the house, the air was tense, sharp, like the moment before a thunderclap. Veronica stood at the threshold of the same kitchen she had once admired for its clean lines and quiet luxury. Now it felt different, more sterile, less like a home. Susie stood by the window, facing the garden. She didn't turn when Veronica entered. You came, she said quietly. I said I would. Veronica set her bag down gently on the table, as if afraid to touch anything too loudly. Susie turned, finally, and her face was unreadable. No makeup today. Hair pulled back. There was no mask. Just a woman standing on the edge of something irreversible. You have 5 minutes, she said. Veronica inhaled. She hadn't rehearsed it. It wouldn't have helped. I lied to you, she began. From the moment we met. I didn't just follow Richard. I didn't just photograph him. I was with him. Susie didn't flinch. I was the woman in the pictures, Veronica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know you hired me at first. It was just coincidence. And by the time I realized, I was already too deep, too scared, and too ashamed. Susie looked down at the floor, as if searching for some piece of herself that had slipped between the cracks in the tiles. Veronica's voice shook now. But I kept going, and I thought I was doing it to protect myself, or to hurt him, or maybe to punish both of us. But then I met you, and you weren't what I expected. You were God, you were kind. You were smart. You were everything he pretended you weren't. Silence bloomed between them. Veronica stepped closer slowly, and I realized I wasn't in love with him anymore. Maybe I never really was. I was just addicted to being seen. Susie finally looked up. Her eyes glistened, but not with tears. They were icy and dry, 2 shards of shattered crystal. You've been sleeping with my husband, she said slowly. Lying to my face. Watching me cry while you passed me the tissues. Veronica opened her mouth to speak, but Susie raised her hand. No, she said. You don't get to defend it. Not now. Veronica nodded, quietly accepting the punishment she'd long feared. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "before the rest unravels. I owed you that." Susie walked past her then, calm, composed. She opened a drawer, pulled out a plain manila envelope, and handed it to her. "What's this?" Veronica asked. "Evidence," Susie replied, "of what he's done. The financial lies. The calls. Everything. I've been collecting it myself." Veronica blinked. "You already knew?" "I didn't know who. But I knew what. I needed you to confirm it." "You did. Why not confront me? I wanted to see how far you'd go." Susie stepped closer, just inches away now. "Now I know. You're not the worst thing that happened to me, Veronica." "He is. But you? You were the most honest liar I've ever met." Veronica looked down at the envelope, then back at Susie, chest tight with something like relief. And something else, shame. "I'm sorry," she said. "I believe you," Susie replied. Then she turned and walked away. Veronica stood there alone, in the home she had infiltrated and betrayed. But for the first time, she didn't feel powerful. Or clever. She just felt free. Richard Pierce didn't even try to hide his confusion when Susie handed him the divorce papers. He stood in his office, the midday light slicing across the glass and stainless steel, casting him in sharp contrast. A predator in a tailored suit. "What the hell is this?" he asked, brows knitting together. "You're an attorney, Richard," Susie said evenly. "Read it." He scanned the header, eyes flicking with disbelief. "You're divorcing me?" She didn't answer. Her silence said more. Richard dropped the papers onto the desk. "This is ridiculous. Whatever this is, we can talk." "No," she cut in. "We can't. Because every time we talk, you lie. Every word. Every smile. Every trip to DC for that imaginary client. I know everything now." His face shifted. Slightly. But she saw it, the first ripple of fear behind his practiced calm. "You went looking?" he asked, suddenly cold. "No," she said, stepping forward. "I hired someone to look for me." He froze. "I know about the hotels. The necklace. Veronica." The name hit him like a slap. His voice dropped, dark and sharp. "She told you?" "Yes," Susie said. "And then she showed me." Richard tried to recover, but he couldn't find footing. "She's unstable. She's obsessed with me. She's been stalking us both." "Richard," Susie said gently, almost kindly, "stop." And he did, because there was something in her tone he'd never heard before. Peace. Resolve. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was done. Susie gathered the papers and placed them back on the desk. "You'll sign these. Quietly. No drama. If you make this messy, I make you public." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. Because he knew she could. She turned and walked to the door. "Oh," she added, pausing with her hand on the handle. "If you're wondering whether Veronica is going to destroy you, don't. She already did. You just haven't felt it yet." And with that, she left. That night, Richard called Veronica. She let it ring 5 times before answering. "You couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you?" he snarled. "I finally did the right thing," she said. "You think this makes you some kind of saint now?" "No," she replied calmly. "I think it makes me free." "You think Susie will forgive you?" "She doesn't need to," Veronica said. "She just needs to forget you." The line went dead. Later that week, Susie sat at her desk, watching the ink dry on the final signature. The divorce was official. No cameras. No public fallout. She didn't want revenge. She wanted her life back. She opened her laptop. Her consultancy paperwork was nearly finished. A firm for women in transition. Legal support. Emotional guidance. Quiet strength. She had a name for it already. Reclaim. The buzzer rang. She walked to the door and opened it. Veronica stood there in a cream blouse and black slacks, resume in hand. Hair pulled back. No makeup. Not hiding anymore. "I heard you're hiring," she said. Susie looked at her. Really looked. Then stepped aside. "Come in." The office was small, but sunlight poured through the windows like it had chosen this place on purpose. Fresh paint. White walls. Soft gray furniture. A vase of wildflowers in the corner. On the glass door, newly etched in minimalist gold lettering, was the name. Reclaim. Legal advocacy for women in transition. Susie stood at the window, sipping her coffee, watching the city stir to life. Down on the street, women in blazers crossed with purpose. Mothers balanced coffee cups and strollers. Students lugged heavy bags and tired eyes. The world kept moving. And so did she. It had been 3 months since the divorce was finalized. 3 months since the final email from Richard's attorney, signed and sealed. He hadn't fought. Hadn't begged. Just signed and faded away. He'd moved on. To someone younger, perhaps more manageable. Susie hadn't asked. She no longer cared. The buzzer rang. She pressed the door release. Veronica stepped inside moments later. She wore no armor today, no heels, no sharp blazer. Just black flats and a simple navy dress. Her hair was in a soft bun. She looked tired, but there was light behind her eyes again. Susie motioned toward the desk. Coffee. Veronica shook her head. Not yet. Nervous stomach. They shared a small, amused silence. I read your proposal, Susie said, tapping the folder between them. You want to start a branch of services just for women coming out of manipulation and abuse. Not just legal. Psychological, financial. You even mentioned shelter networks. I've lived in the margins between love and control, Veronica said, her voice steady. I know what it looks like when someone gets trapped and doesn't know how to get out. I want to help them recognize the pattern before it consumes them. Susie studied her, then nodded. You're hired. Veronica blinked. Really? You don't owe me penance, Susie said. But I'll take your purpose. The two women smiled at each other. Not the tight, wary smiles they once wore, but something smaller. Real. Outside, a woman approached the glass door, reading the gold letters. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Later that afternoon, Veronica typed her name onto the bottom of a client intake form for the first time. Officially legally. Susie watched her from across the room. Once, this woman had shattered her world. Now, she might help build something that outlived both of their pain. Because betrayal had taught them something neither victory nor revenge ever could. Survival isn't enough. You have to make something of the wreckage. You have to reclaim it.